There is a discussion to be had about government ID cards, and I don't think that we any longer have the luxury of making the same civil liberty arguments that we had in 1997. 1997, we had when Blair was pushing ID cards, we had demographics that were probably 94% white. We were still a largely cohesive, high-trust country. But the last 30 years of immigration have blown that out of the water. And with that goes the classic arguments about who we are as a country and our approach to having IDs.
Good morning, folks, and welcome to The English Way. Now, this morning I have a guest I've had on before, which is Pete North. Pete North, I think since the last time we spoke, the first time we spoke, you were rather politically homeless, and you've since found a home in politics in the Homeland Party. And I was noticing some discussions about re-immigration and immigration and mass deportations and all of this, and it just turned into very much a circular feed. And I thought that maybe if Pete could just come on and speak his bit about Homeland's stance on this and why they've taken the stance that they have, it might just clear a few things up for it's essentially a hardcore bunch of, I don't know whether it's Zoomers and Groypers online. Morning, Pete. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
So how are things? Because last time we spoke, you were pretty disaffected with politics as a whole. I think, if I'm right in thinking, I think you'd been having some conversations with Ben Habib at the time, but you weren't particularly hopeful about anything that was on offer by anybody. And then you suddenly found yourself kind of at home with Homeland. How did that happen?
Well, I think what happened with reform was wholly predictable. I was talking to Ben Habib, and he was very receptive to my ideas, and I genuinely got a feeling that I'd been listened to. And then when Farage came back into the fray, it became immediately obvious that any proposal that along the lines of policy and reforming its own internal constitution would fall on deaf ears. That was not going to happen. Ben Habib took those messages to the party, was repudiated. Same happened with Rupert Lowe. Nigel Farage wants reform to remain this undefined populist catch-all party with no definition, no ideas, no plan. And that to me is setting reform up for a failure. It's going to come later down the line. But if you're in the belief that because we are polling well and because we're winning elections, then that's the only measure of success, then you're never going to address any of your internal shortcomings or your ideological or policy deficiencies. And then when you actually get to power, you've promised all of these things that you're going to do, and then you find you can't do them. And this is across the board. Everything is much more difficult to deliver than whatever slogans you're bandying about. So I'm very cautious about empty populist sloganeering, and I've argued that any party or entity that wants to be taken seriously has to pitch its messaging appropriately. They have to be ambitious but realistic, and if they're ambitious, you've also got to prove that you're serious, you've got the goods, you've given it some thought, you've looked at the potential obstacles, and you've geared your message in such a way that serious people will take you seriously. And so that, to an extent, a large extent, that message was received by the Homeland Party. So I've been quite keen to cooperate with them as an ordinary member. And on that score, they've actually pitched very cleverly a remigration policy, and that's been well received. Problem is, a lot of people they don't read her policies, however well you write them, however concisely and cleanly. They've just seen remigration, and they take that and run with it on the assumption that remigration means deport all brown people. And there's two problems with that. In that, firstly, it's rather toxic from a comms perspective, but from the other perspective, it's not actually deliverable. There's no, you couldn't say come to power and say, right, we're in power now. First job is to procure a fleet of deportation vans and recruit a small army, and we're going to just go around the streets rounding up anyone who's brown. That's the far extremist, idiotic interpretation of it.
Just look at Northern Ireland. We had far less to kind of deal with in Northern Ireland, like just a tiny, tiny group of people. We had the might of the British military behind it, and
Mm.
they went house to house, and they still couldn't sort it. So, like, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen without catastrophic consequences that we will regret for generations.
Yeah, well, you have to learn lessons from what has been attempted thus far, and I think people might remember when there's a couple about 2 3 years ago, possibly longer now, but when they sent a deportation van into a suburb of Glasgow, word soon got round, and you got a big crowd around the vans, and so there's going to be pushback, and there's going to be left wing activism that's going to put the kibosh on any kind of attempt. And the more you put your boot down in the authoritarian sense, the more you're going to push the streets towards unrest, civil conflict, and you're going to bring Muslims out on the street rioting and yada yada. And so that's that's one of the reasons why mass deportations as a concept is not going to work, and will fall to bits, and will probably result in any government trying it being brought down. And
Here's what what do you classify as mass deportations then? Because I genuinely think that there will be a deportation of criminal elements within the next 6 7 years within the foreign.
sure. Well, the thing is, you've got to, when you think about immigration, you've got to look at it in its constituent parts. And the first and foremost thing that people want dealing with is illegal immigration. And that's where you're dealing with people who are in the country and they've entered the country without permission, and they are working illegally. On that score, you have the legitimacy and the legal and moral authority to go and round them up and deport them. But you are in fact dealing with people who don't want to be found and don't want to be removed. So you can look at other countries and have a look at how that's worked, and where it's been tried in America. They send blitz wagons to places that are likely to employ illegal immigrants, and all the illegals don't show up for work, so they disappear into the woodwork. So this has a morale boosting effect where you're making it harder for businesses to employ illegal immigrants, but they're still working under the radar. So you've then got to improve your local authority detection systems, your housing inspectorates to find beds in sheds and illegally sublet social housing, and you've got to do tax inspections of these Turkish barbers on the high street. You've got to do health inspections of takeaways and check that people are working there or are allowed to do so. So there's a whole raft of
Taxi
enforcement
drivers,
to,
takeaways, vape shops, mobile phone
yeah.
shops, candy shops. You could just go on and on and on.
Yeah,
I've got Asian friends of mine who are saying that's fake business, that's fake business, that's fake business, because they all know.
yeah. I mean, we all know. I mean, you could send out the police just to look at car washes on any given day, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
so um,
Then you've got actually
basically,
businesses which look more legitimate, like bars, restaurants,
yeah.
country pubs, haberdasheries, any of these Turkish haberdasheries, etc. They're quite often set up with Albanian drug money, and people don't realize that they're Albanian drug money backed. So they're
Well,
laundering money. If someone's got a business and they're from overseas and they bought a business and they got 20 grand's worth of stock in the business, where the friggin' hell's that come?
yeah, there's the same can be said of care homes. There's some care homes in this country that are essentially criminal operations, from the way in which they hire illegal immigrants,
They
all the
have a
way
big
through to where the money came from and where the money's going. So
They have a big family here in Newcastle, a huge. Now they're Indian, I believe. They're being investigated for precisely that. So
yeah,
yeah,
so basically, what remigration is, by the definition that the Homeland Party has adopted, is that remigration is a range of measures to uh, encourage self-emigration. And, if you close down all the avenues by which illegal workers can abuse the system and find cheaper accommodations so they can undercut domestic workers, you remove the economic value of being here. And then if you look at measures such as taxing remittances and money transfers towards certain countries, you can absolutely destroy the pull factor for not just illegal immigrants, but also legal immigrants. Um, to a very large extent, they will remove themselves. And that's what you want. That's really what you want, because you don't want to be in the position of sending out the heavy boys in riot vans at 6 a.m. Dawn raids, because it's just not going to work. Just because of the optics of it. And you remember the Hare Hills riots, of course, where social services turned up to take a kid into care. The whole community turned on them.
yeah.
We are beyond the point where we can assert the authority of the state in certain communities around the country. You send in deportation vans into, say, Manningham, West Yorkshire. What do you think's going to happen? So these are
Yeah,
the real world, realistic scenarios that you have to think about when you're devising policy. And if you're devising policy cleverly, that then dictates what your public messaging is. But if you're putting it out that your policy is deport all brown people, and on day one we're going to send out the remigration vans, forget about it. Not only are most people going to find that morally abhorrent, anybody serious who you want to persuade that you are a credible party is just going to say, "You forget it. You're just not serious."
I think it's like there's two things. If you're talking about head of running a country, then you got to have two things in mind. One of them is got to be everything has to be as frugal as possible. Every aspect of government should be running towards reducing the tax burden for the citizens, right? Whether it's local or national. But you've also got to think in terms of peace and stability. So I think, from my point of view, I do think that there will be some dawn raids for the harder criminal, because we have some nasty criminal elements in this country that we're
Oh,
only
no
going to
doubt.
by force, and it's not going to be pretty. But you need to limit that as much as possible, like they did in El Salvador, right? So, but I think the other thing you have to do is you have to make the financial and the cultural aspect so opposed that it just becomes uninviting. Why are
Yes.
they here? The majority of them are here to leech. The majority of them are here to strip money, because they have a lot of them don't understand how our economy works, and they think Britain has this endless well of cash. Under fiat, we do, but it's only a service illusion because it comes home to roost eventually, right?
Mhm.
So the once you cut the money off, millions will go. Millions will go within
Yeah.
a year. once you start taxing overseas remittances, because all we're doing here, in some cases, it's honest, decent folk who have come over here to essentially use the British system to build absolute palaces and estates in their home country, right?
Mhm.
In the majority of cases, we are literally taking criminal elements from other countries in the world and allowing them to build almost operations that can challenge the local and national status quo in their home countries in terms of militia, right? We are
Mhm.
destabilizing some of these former Eastern Bloc countries. That needs to stop. So you should tax overseas remittances like 75, 80%. Just make it unappealing.
But even that is a simplistic
90,
policy
95.
because you're then looking at once you put the blocks on remittances, criminality has a way of finding a way through. That
Always,
then
always.
extends into Bitcoin, which they're probably already using cryptocurrencies. So you need all kinds of financial surveillance mechanisms. The point is whatever your objective on immigration is, it's actually going to take a whole suite of policies, and they're going to be research-based policies aimed at individual aspects. So you create a net that's going to have a cumulative effect, and
Yeah,
and that's how you do it.
isn't it? It's like
Say it.
if it's going to be moves and counter moves. If like, all right, like let's just take an example. If you said, right, okay, so foreign nationals can't own British businesses, all the Albanians will do is go and find some crackhead, some English crackhead somewhere who needs his fix regularly, and say, right, and I know this actually happens, right? I know for a fact this happens. They'll say, right, you go and register yourself at company's house as a professional barber, right? We'll give you this barbershop. We'll supply you with 100 quid's worth of crack a week, plus your living expenses and your rent and a car and all the rest of it. And all you have to do is turn up 3 days a week, and we just put 50k, 60k a year through that business, and we're going to give you 25, and we'll keep the other 25. Right?
Mm.
That's all that will happen. So there's going to be this countenance of things, and it's almost like someone has to sit down and go, all right, well, if you do that, what's the counter move? If you do that, what's the counter move? If you do that, what's the counter move? And I think that's where you're really good, actually. And I don't think anybody has. And it's like, do you not realize that they are ingenious at finding ways through? Literally genius at finding ways through.
Yeah, well, as you say, this is much of the immigration. It's about exploiting this country's weaknesses, and it's exploiting our markets. And so you've got to look at it from that economic chess perspective. So um, we as a party, we looked at different approaches. So we've got a basic immigration and remigration policy that sets out what remigration is, what our criteria is, and that's as good as far as it goes. But you also need policy on housing, policy on health, policy on the full suite, and every part of your manifesto is going to have a remigration aspect of it. When it comes to financial regulation, it will have a remigration aspect to that, and only over time, as you build up your manifesto, have you got a complete package that's going to deal with the issues. But if you believe, like Reform does, that, oh, we're going to deport all the illegal immigrants, and as soon as we get to power, we're going to set about that, just forget it. That plan's going to fall apart within
Yeah. Yeah.
weeks.
What they mean,
You're
what
not
they
going to get results, and you'll be out in a single term.
exactly what they mean by that is everyone who's in a hotel, we're just going to put her a bus and send home. That's what they mean by that. And I think that number one, a lot will scarper before the buses get there. And I don't think that, that they're the tip. There's got to be at least 2, if not 3 million illegal people in this country.
Easily 2 million, yeah.
And I think that they only know where maybe 700,000 are roughly.
Yeah.
They have a vague idea where about 700,000 are at a maximum. And I think the rest of them got a darn clue. So I don't think that that's going to work at all. And the minute that Abdul thinks that the bus is coming, his mate Ahmed, who's been off the radar for 10 years, is going to say, come on, come here. So-and-so down here, let us work in the car wash for now. So, like,
Well,
it's just ill thought through.
yeah, one of the things you've identified there is I see this particularly in the care sector, where you've got 4 or 5 different workers who all look vaguely similar, all sharing the same ID cards. So there's huge amount of identity fraud going on, and so again, it brings about questions if we really want to get on top of this. Um, there is a discussion to be had about government ID cards, and I don't think that we any longer have the luxury of making the same civil liberty arguments that we had in 1997. 1997, we had um, when Blair was pushing ID cards, we had demographics that were probably 94% white. We were still a largely cohesive, high trust country. But the last 30 years of immigration have blown that out of the water. And with that goes the classic arguments about who we are as a country and how and our approach to having IDs. If IDs become a tool by which we can close down on the kind of identity fraud that facilitates illegal immigration and illegal working, then it's something. It's not something I'm personally going to say. I think we should do that, because I don't know. I really don't know. But I think it's not a debate that can be dismissed out of hand, and it's a discussion we need to have alongside
Yeah, it'd be like
a
limited,
whole
wouldn't it?
array of different approaches.
Yeah, limited powers, limited time. Do you know what I mean? It would have to be something that's okay. This is an emergency measure, and then by order of the crown, it is rescinded after 5 years, 10 years. That's it. It's
Yeah.
never. We need this in order to sort out X, Y, and Z, and then it's absolutely gone. And if it's not gone, we're all going to the noose. It needs to be that kind of thing. It's interesting. So one of the things that's going on online is we've got, and I understand, you and I are older, we've lived differently, we've had more freedoms in life than a lot of the young kids have had, right? And they're looking at this and they're going, we have no freedom, we've got no prospects, no future, and it's all because of immigration. So they just want all the immigrants gone, all of them. They just want a 100% white country. And I don't think that within 15 years or 25 years, that's practically possible. And as far as I could tell, because Homeland initially, when they were kicking this about, people were going, "Oh, you're fully racist party. You want to ethnically cleanse the nation." And I think Steve Laws said, I remember listening to him, and I know he's not um, the boss or anything, but even he said that no, that's not what I'm talking about, and it's not practically possible. But we do need to be in the mid to high 90s of ethnic stability, or it falls apart.
Yeah,
So
he's not wrong about that.
yeah,
The point is, if you're going to set that kind of target, well, any target, as we've seen with net zero, has to be a realistic target, and you need a realistic plan to meet it. And if you're going to have a plan, you need policy, and you've got to have a thorough understanding of what's happening, why it's happening, and how you prevent it. Um, and that requires a level of thinking and debate and sophistication that your average Zoomer shitposter isn't interested in having. Not least because there's more money to be made through engagement farming and saying, oh, deport all the brown people, millions must be deported. And there's a certain it's quite seductive, that, because I've done it. It's fun to do. There's a certain shock jock humor in it, and it does get a lot of engagement, and it builds a certain consensus among a certain cohort, and that has its uses. But ultimately, this is a problem we have to think our way out of, and we have to be thought leaders in proposing explaining the problem, but also proposing the solutions. And of course, it is a question of reputation building. If we're seen as a bit of an edgy party, if we're controversial, we also have to prove on a more sophisticated level that we're actually serious. That we're not just like Reform, we're not just churning out the slogans and the quasi-racist innuendo. We actually have to be a full package. And of course, if nationalism is to grow, it needs that sort of internal discipline that puts the cranks to one side and is actually capable of having serious grown-up conversations with doubters and people who feel a bit squeamish, as I did. There's a lot of normie people who understand that immigration's out of control. We've got to stop the influx and we've got to deal with sectarianism. The majority of people will agree with us, but they will not subscribe to or vote for extremist solutions. Nobody wants to see mass ethnic cleansing or anything, or will they sign up to any messaging that suggests that? So it's Kenny Smith talks about sensible nationalism, but essentially what we're talking about is a nationalism and a nationalist party that's a bit more sophisticated than the populist slop merchants we've seen emerging out of the Reform UKIP sphere.
Yeah, I think it's all well and good crying for Harry and St. George, but at least they had a plan when they stormed. And I think they do need a plan. And the irony is, if you got into a big enough platform and you ran on that, 10 to 15% of immigrants would vote for you. And people don't
Yeah,
get
I'm
this.
quite sure.
People don't understand that there is 10 to 20% of them who just don't identify with the mass lot that's been brought in and just go, I literally want nothing to do with these people. I think they're repugnant and they're ruining the good thing that I had here. Like, I was making money and now I can't make any bloody money. Like, what the hell? And I left to get away from you and now you followed me. So there is a thing where it doesn't, and I understand, look, if you're 22, 23, 24 and you're a lad who's just seeing your mates getting knifed in London, or you're a young lass who you or your friends or your family are getting raped, I get it, right? I do. I get it. I understand why that sentiment's there. And in a large part, I think what you see online is a venting of emotional frustration because there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to say. They are frightened. They are angry. So I do get it, but I think that there will be mechanisms if change, and you've got to be practical and you've got to think it through because what they're asking for, it would be horrific. Like there's no two ways around it because a lot of these communities are quietly armed.
Yeah.
The people don't realize, there is weapons being shipped in. They are quietly armed because they are a minority country who are culturally opposed to the majority. So they're tooling themselves up for what they see as an inevitable clash. So it just will not be pretty. And I think that's part of why Labour are so ineffective because they need the votes and two, they're cowards and they're infiltrated.
They've got their heads buried in the sand, and this is it. This is we are in a slow march towards a civil war, whether we want one or not, and it won't be as the sort of race warriors believe, where it'll be the whites rising up against ethnic minorities. It'll be ethnic minorities fighting each other and fighting us, and we will gradually see cities becoming demilitarized zones, and so there's this. Nobody. I think actually everybody understands now that something has to be done. Action must be taken. It really comes down to a question of how do you bring those people on board to vote for more robust, a more robust model, and you do that by again identifying the problems, promoting the solutions.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of show and tell as well. I think people, particularly when you get, I think there's like a 25% hardcore like us and like the people on Twitter who can see it coming. And there's literally about an 18-month gap at the minute between what we're calling for and then what becomes mainstream. And it's just because we're literally, I said to you once, one of the biggest problems you've got, Pete, is that you're so far ahead of the curve that nobody else can see around the corner.
Well,
So,
we get there eventually.
yeah,
I mean,
but
look at Rupert Lowe. He's been on a journey of his own.
yeah,
He sort
acting
of
fast.
started off.
It's gone like this.
Mm. But whether he can make the next leap as to, all right, the problem is much more serious. It's got to go further than just illegal immigrants. Whether he can actually bring his intellect to bear on solutions, that's the next step. So that I think that's what's putting me at odds with a lot of nationalists. In that I'm done with the diagnosis. I'm done with the whinging about the problems. I'm now thinking, how do we tackle this? What's it going to take? And measuring what it will actually take against the simplistic slogans that political parties are putting out, there's a mismatch. And I really do believe this is going to be reform's downfall, where they're going to promise so much, just as Boris Johnson did. All this upbeat optimism, we're in this and we're not the uniparty. We'll get things done. We won't put up with the bureaucracy and the red tape of the civil service. They'll make,
And the bureaucracy of the civil
they
service.
will come into it wide-eyed and they will get bogged down in the mire, and there's the first fleet of deportation vans that they send out, they'll have all the lefties squealing, and all the human rights lawyers out. And actually, this is another aspect to it. Whatever you're gonna do, whatever you think you're going to do, there's all the appeals and all the legal impediments to doing what you want to do, judicial review, court injunctions, a whole load of problems. So before you even put pen to paper on procuring your deportation vans or whatever it is you want to do, you've actually got to leave the ECHR, repeal the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, pull out of the Refugee Convention, pull out of various UN agreements. Most people are on board with that and just think it's as, Ben Habib talks about a great repeal bill. Fine, fair enough, we want to do that. But what people don't understand is all of these disparate acts are the patchwork quilt of the British Constitution now. This is what replaced the old order. And the old order has died. And so if you're talking about replacing the current constitution with a new one, you've got to first specify what that looks like. And nobody's doing any thinking about that. Nobody's thinking about the new legal order, the new constitution, how you're going to bring it about. And unless you solve that problem first, you're not going to be able to solve any of your other problems either.
I think if they really want to, this is the thing. It's like if you look at the Repeal Act that they're all talking about, all it does is grants all the power to Parliament, and you can't have that. You would have to go back to the early 1900s where the monarch, the House, and the Lords had an equal share, because you need that triumvirate of power to hold the mechanism, because they all served a different function in different ways. Parliament kept the spending of the monarch and the warring nature of the monarch, but the monarch kept the power-hungry, leeching effect of Parliament in check. The Lords effectively kept them both in check. Your Lords need private retinues. If you really want to get the proper balance, the Lords need. I think the last private retinue was the Duke of Northumberland. It would be a Geordie, obviously. And I think you need to have this balance of power to make it all work. You can't give it all to Parliament. I'm sorry. Like, we've seen that it's so corruptible, and as they've leached power since 1919, I think it was. So gradually they've leached power away from the Lords and the monarch over the last 106 years. You can see that all that's happened is this leech has turned into a cancer. The Parliament can never, ever, ever be trusted. We should never It's just a
You,
politician.
you've
The
got
only
your
thing a politician is to be frightened that we're watching them.
yes, yeah, because you've got your Ben Habibs and Rupert Lowe saying we need to restore Parliament and make Parliament supreme. It's like, who do you
You
think
don't
did all
understand
this
English.
to it in the
You don't
first
understand.
place?
Yeah. If that's what you're calling for, you do not understand England, and you do not understand the magic of the system that we've had for 1,000 years.
But then you've got the problem of, we've had this old order. If you're talking about a restoration, how do you secure public consent for that? Do you honestly believe a majority is going to willingly vote for a restoration to hereditary peers? The egalitarian society that we are now, are they going to understand the concept of what we had before when the demand is for more of an elected upper body? It might be a worse system, but that's what people understand democracy to be when they can actually have the power to hire and fire who sits on
We don't.
on their behalf.
Yeah, what we essentially have is the election of various Diet Coke mafioso bosses into positions of power. That's what we have. It's not democracy at all.
No,
And I think people just need to understand that it's a total sham. Not, the 20th century democracy is basically a George Soros open society wet dream. It's a banker's choice. It doesn't exist. It's complete nonsense. You far rather, in my opinion, have the difficulty of removing one king than 1,000 corrupt individuals.
indeed.
That's how I stand. Now, let's get on. I think we touched on this briefly before we came on air. And I want to talk about, I don't want to get into Nigel and his character and the fights that have gone on and all the rest of it. And I don't want to take away any credit of what's just happened recently, which I think in the long term is excellent for British politics, because I do think we need a local council takeover. And that's the only way we can stall things. But I think there's a disconnect between because I think there's a difference between Reform and Nigel. There's a difference between the party and the man. And I think there's a disconnect between why they think they're winning and why I think they're winning. Right. So from what I see, they think they're winning because in their mind, people are voting to smash the Uniparty, which is it's something that Nigel wants to do. He's got a bugbear against Labour, obviously, and he has an even bigger bugbear against the Conservatives because they didn't want him. And he wants to destroy them both, which I think is also in the national interest. Great, fantastic. And I think that he's seeing all of this as an endorsement of him and the way that he behaves personally. But I don't think it is. I think it's a case of, well, we have nobody else. It's hope. We're hoping that you carry out what we want. Now, I'm up in the north of England, right? This is the Red Wall, deep in the Red Wall. I've spoken to actual Labour Party members, right? They want mass deportations of criminals, foreigners, rapists. They want the grooming gang thoroughly investigated. They want people, if necessary, executed, right? They want the taxes down, less taxation. Just it needs to go. They want net zero gone. Okay, they don't want to destroy the green belts. They don't want, and nobody does. Nobody's talking about that. Like everything else, they polarize it. Well, if you're against net zero, then you just want to concrete the country. It's like you got to concrete the country anyway. How do you think it's going to work? Like, come on, nobody wants that. They want something that's in the middle. Now, these are hardcore Labour Party voters, and I see them. They'll go, "I don't want to be racist," but and then want to say it. And I'm like, and there's a couple of times I've stepped in and said, you're not being racist. You're pointing out cultural differences. You want people who are culturally unable to assimilate to go. That's what you want. And there's a difference. And I think if they do not, and if they're not prepared within 18 months to enact this, because Labour could just go, happened in 79, and we're almost seeing a mirror of the 1970s, of the late 70s Labour Party stretch. It's happening, and that's how Thatcher got in 1979. The people took to the streets, kicked Labour out. The same thing could happen again. Like, it's highly possible. They need to be ready within 18 months to walk in with a robust set of policies that are thought out. They need thousands of people working on this, like Trump did, right? Or they're going to fail the British public. They'll be thrown out within a term, and they will never be allowed to show their faces in public again. And I don't think Nigel quite grasps this. This is not a vote for Nigel Farage as a person. This isn't a personal endorsement. If he carries out what they want, they'll love him. They'll build a statue to him, right? If he carries out what they want, we'll all go, fair enough, well played. we got it wrong, we judged it wrong, you're brilliant, fantastic, let's build a statue. I'll give you a quid towards it, right? But if he gets it wrong, because they've been betrayed so far and they feel now we need a Richard, we need a Henry, we need an Alfred, we need an Arthur. And if he steps in and pretends to be that and fails, I think the wrath that will be unleashed will be like unlike anything we've seen before.
Oh, no doubt, yeah. I mean, that's partly why I'm hedging my bets on an alternative party, because if you've got a small party that has built a brand and has built a reputation, built policy, and there's a real product there, it can very quickly inflate from that sense of disaffection. So I would actually put money on if Reform wins, they will crash and burn inside probably a year, the way Boris Johnson's Tories did, and they'll cling on to power for as long as they can. But whatever their majority is, they'll lose. And then you've got you're back into coalition politics and a completely ineffectual political system. That's when I think you're going to get a realization that these moderate, middle of the road parties are not going to deliver. So
No.
the arc is toward. I'm not going to say Homeland is extreme, but more extreme than the centre ground.
It's robust. It's not extreme. None of this would have been classed as extreme under 97 Tony Blair. None of this would have been classed as extreme. I mean, it's mental. This isn't extreme. This is actually interest.
If you look at the nationalism that Kenny Smith is pushing, it's not a million miles away from, Tony Benn, Peter Shaw. It's nationalism used to be the norm. That's one of the points that Homeland makes, is that it's only in very recent years that nationalism has become this boogeyman stalking politics. It was normal for the Tories, the Labour Party, to be nationalist in sentiment. First and foremost, that was the foundation of our politics.
90s Blair was all about Britannia. It was the new Britannia. Like it was a nationally fueled party, and David Blunkett loved throwing people out of the country. So it's like what happened? We've been gaslit. We're being gaslit. We're being absolutely gaslit, and it's just and I think that if on the current trajectory, I think what you're saying will happen on the current trajectory. If they change, fine. And I think this is where parties like Homeland will come in, because we do need something robust, and I think we need something actually pretty robust for about a decade to get anywhere near sorting this out. It takes something hard to actually pull things back into balance, because we're literally, lots of us are falling off the cliff. That's how far it's gone.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who've criticised Homeland and said, there's no point, because there's no way you can possibly be ready for 2029, and you won't be able to fight an election. As I keep saying to people, the world doesn't end in 2029. It's not a cut-off date. Building a movement takes as long as it takes. Politics is a slow process. It's a slow building process. But once you build the foundations of something, growth can be very rapid, but you need to be ready for the occasion when it does. And if you're banking on a broader collapse of mainstream politics, and in that I include reform, there's every sense in building the foundations now.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it from the point of view of the national interest, let's just take the absolute at worst. Homeland will influence policy of every party. I think it's beginning to influence policy of other parties, because people are saying the youth, it's almost like the Gen X and the Boomers are flocking to reform, but the Zoomers and the Alphas they're going to end up.
Yeah, that's one of the issues that the movement as a whole has to address, is the generational disconnect, because what you're seeing is some young radicals, their message is actually off-putting to the boomer generation and to an extent my generation, because I'm Gen X, I'm 46. So my associations with the British nationalist movement is for right or wrong. It's for the associations in my brain are always going to be with skinheads and bother booted thugs. It was the uniform of the so-called far right at the time, and so. When you start seeing the toxic message of Zoomer shitposters feeding into the mainstream of new nationalism, it kind of puts a ceiling on its growth potential, where it's not going to break out of the internet and get people, get ordinary Gen Xers and boomers. And of course, Gen Xers will become the next boomers. There has to be an agreed meeting point between the two positions. And unless there can be, it's not about unifying the right, it's about unifying the generations. But at the moment, they're each putting each other off. Zoomers cannot stand the utter cringeworthy boomer slot mentality, and that works both ways because the Zoomers look like unhinged little Hitlers. So how you begin to marry these two disparate or three disparate groups together is the challenge that a party like Homeland has got to think about and overcome.
In 5 years, demographically, it won't be an issue. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
really,
I mean,
really cold way to look at it, but it's true. Like it, somebody mentioned something the other day, and I said, well, it's a boomer disease, and it's dying off, so it doesn't matter.
I'm not
Like what
sure. I'm not.
on?
I'm not sure about that because not forgetting that Gen X is going to inherit a lot of boomer wealth and become the next generation of entitled,
Yeah, but
selfish
we're
people.
bad. We're broken.
Yeah,
we
well,
we had all the freedom that the boomers had, but it was a far less safe world.
yeah. But the idea that any generation dies off and takes their ideas with it completely is a fiction, because if that was true, then the stodgy old conservatism would have died years ago. But there's a bigger appetite for it than ever.
Like it won't carry on in the same way because what we'll find is that the boomer wealth, there is no wealth to pass on, and a lot of them won't pass it on anyway. The boomers have this weird thing of bequeathing it all to the National Trust or to the local dog sniffs.
There's going to be some very rich cat homes.
Oh yeah. There'll be some really wealthy cat ladies somewhere. So, but I think it'll become a smaller and smaller problem, and I do think that there has to be this thing, and part of it's going to be smashing the extreme view of the war. I think that it's like you had two nationalist nations that went to war and fought each national pride, and somehow national pride is wrong. And I think until they smash all, because there's myths and there's extremes on either sides. Until that's completely shattered, I don't think we move forward. I think there's like, and I think it's going to happen in the next few years. Honestly, I can just see it falling apart. There'll be some declassification of something that just literally puts that myth to bed, and we move forward. And it'll be like, well,
Maybe.
lunatics on one side, one lunatic was worse than the other, but no one was standing there in the moral virtue of God being wonderful. Everyone did absolutely terrible things during that war. Stalin, arguably worse than anyone. And at the end of the day, we were kind of cooked because the US administration was communist supporting. Stalin was obviously communist supporting, and Churchill was arguably too drunk to realize. And we got screwed. What they did was break up the empire, destroyed national assets. We sold off. I mean, you'll know this. How good were we at aircraft in the 50s and 60s? We were years ahead of the Americans, and we sold it off. We shut it down.
Debatable.
Yeah,
I'm going to need a whole different show for that debate
yeah.
because
brilliant.
For every
And we
for every world beater, we had a dozen absolutely tragic failures. Blackburn aircraft. It took them till the Buccaneer before they produced something that was actually worthwhile. It was almost 70 years of aviation before there was something that was um, worth its salt.
well, if you're going to do something, it's worth taking your time. So, but it's like we sold off everything, and this is part of the thing. There's like a disease. This is the other thing. It's like there's this disease that Britain's the underdog. We're the underdog. We've got nothing, and yet we succeed. It's like, hang on, we were masters of the universe. What the bloody hell are you talking about? Do you realize how far we've fallen? The entire world you live in is our world. We made the bloody thing. The railways that built the world. The coal comes from down the road here. The North of England built the world. The railways that were developed in the north of England built the world. The steel largely came from the north of England. It built the world. We were masters of the universe. We're not the underdogs. We are the inheritors. And this is part of this World War II myth that we're the underdog, the underclass. No, we were badly managed. We had one of the best militaries in the world, basically. And even the Germans in the war said this: best soldiers in the world, toughest soldiers in the world, hardest people to fight against. The generals are weak and feckless. We're just mismanaged. We've been mismanaged for 100 years. And it's like, it's this thing of giving the kids the sense of pride that they're clearly craving. And as they're craving, they're going over the top, right? But then also kind of getting this thing across of like, we're not the weak man. We're allowing ourselves to be in this supine position, and we're not. Like, we were literally the top of the pyramid, and people they just can't seem to grasp it, And it's like, look, regardless of what happened after the war, regardless of how every other country was refinanced apart from Britain, we are not that weak nation. We are this incredible nation of people. I've got a book up there by Cleon Skousen. The main target of the Communist Party, the Communist International in the 1930s, was the United States and Great Britain's empire. They wanted both, and they got them. They got them both. There's a reason they wanted to go after the Anglos, and it's because the Anglos are literally world beaters. You get rid of the Anglos, everything else collapses. They weren't bothered about Germany. They weren't bothered about Australia or Canada or anybody else. They wanted the two strong, dominant Anglo nations. That's it. So give the kids what they want. Yes, you are awesome. It's your birthright. Live up to it. Claim it. You're an Englishman. Hold your head high. And the boomers, sorry, deal with it.
Well,
We'll
it'll
make
be
you great.
interesting to see how that develops.
And I think it's like we cannot do this without going back and saying we are a bloody brilliant nation. Full stop. Nobody outperformed better than the English did. Arguably, maybe the Scots within the British system outperformed, and they did. But nobody outperformed more than the English, right? It's one of the most intelligent, industrious nations in the world, and we've been told for 70 years that we are literally crap, and it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
So there you go. The English, be proud, stand up tall, and kick them in the nuts.
Indeed.
So yes, I think that's, to me, I see it as that is the way. And it's like, I get that the kids are disaffected. I get that they're clutching to extreme things. Look, the Groypers and the Zoomer posters, I don't think you're ever going to do anything on them. They're there. They've got 87 followers. It's always the same. And if you disagree with them, you're a Zionist. And if you disagree in the wrong way, you're a commie. Or
it's a
you're
no-win game. It's not
yeah,
even worth playing. It's a block-on-site thing for me now, and I personally feel that any organisation or party that countenances any of that is on a loser, and I'm really pleased to see that Kenny Smith and Homeland they don't tolerate it, and with Steve Laws's departure, he's taken a lot of that with him. And it's there's a real sort of discipline emerging from Homeland. I've stepped back a little bit just to reclaim my sanity, because a lot of people they actually believe I'm steering the party or controlling it somehow, which somehow makes it Zionist. And it's like, for God's sake, I'm just an ordinary member, and so for the time being, I'm just stepping out of the fray Not resigning from the party or anything drastic, but the party needs space to grow and develop without the problems that I bring to it. So yeah, so I'll be watching carefully and closely and really rooting for them.
Yeah, well, look, I was, it made perfect sense when you said that you joined Homeland, actually. And I was really pleased because I think you do need an outlet. I remember when I first spoke to you, I said I wanted to speak to people who had actual answers, not just spotting the problem and not just giving a slogan, but look, this is practically how this would work, because you need systems. And you were somebody that I identified very early as someone whose mind works in what I call like a cause and effect of like, well, if that happens, then
Mhm.
that happens. Like, and I can do that to a certain extent, but I don't think to quite to the depth that you can, where you can walk through a thing and you go, well, if that happens, that's going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to see 10 links down, right? And you go,
Mhm.
well, it's just going to lead here. And to me, that's how I see. I see things happen, and then I see the sequence of events unlock, and I go, well, that's just going to lead to here in 10 years. So I was really, really pleased to see that you had somewhere to put that, because I think you've got great ideas, and I think, I said once that you should be every eternal optimist's right hand man, because where he goes, yes, we shall win, you'll go, well, how?
Mhm.
How? There's, you're going to march, but then you're marching 10 days uphill. You got a 20-kilo backpack. You got this, you got this, you got this, you got this, you got this. And he has to go away and go, oh, yeah, how am I going to do that? And that's what every general needs, is somebody like you by their side, kind of telling them, well, okay, that's great. And it's wonderful. And I love your sentiment. But how the hell are you going to do that then? What does that look like
Mhm.
in real? And I think that's what's missing from politics in England as a whole. As we've lost our substance, as the bends of this world have disappeared, what we're left with is just huzzah, and that's it.
Yeah, well, this is my first rodeo. This is a facet of British politics. We said, way back in 2014, as it was ramping up towards the election and subsequently the referendum, and some of us were saying, shouldn't we have a Brexit plan? Shouldn't we have a vision and some policies as to what happens after? And if we've got that ambition, maybe it'll shape what and how we negotiate. But of course, the Aaron Bankses of the world, Nigel Farage, they didn't want to know about plans and policies. Vote Leave didn't either. Dominic Cummings said, planning and policy, that's for jokers, no, not bothered. And did anyone get the Brexit that they were after? Nah. And it was completely predictable that this is how it was going to end up.
Yeah, well, we are where we are. And I think a new thing is coming, and I think Homeland are going to be part of that. Whatever size, I have no idea. I'd like to think they would have some influence on where it's going nationally, because they do have some actual real world options that a lot of people
Mm.
just don't have. And I think that both the Tories and Reform are going to end up stealing some of Homeland's policies. I think that will happen. And I think
No.
you've got to just keep cracking on, because it all pushes towards the national interest. And look, I'm not affiliated with any party. I don't think I ever will be. I'm very apolitical. I'm a very spiritual man. I look at it from a big arc. And all I'm looking
Mhm.
for is, it's almost like, well, that's going to be, I know where the destination is. I'm just looking for the people and the things that history is singling out to push us towards that destination. That's what I look for. And I certainly see that Homeland have a part to play in pushing the country towards the destination it needs to be at. And I'm pleased you're in them. I think it's a good place for you at the moment.
We shall see.
Yes. But look, Pete, it's been lovely to talk to you. I know it's a bank holiday Sunday, so I'll let you get back to
Righty
um
ho.
as
There's
usual,
always
you're
work
sunny
to be done.
when everyone's off. And I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Good to see
All
you.
right, wonderful. Where can people find you, Pete?
Um, Somewhere north of York. No, I'm on Northern Variant and FUD Daily on X.
Brilliant, brilliant, excellent. Speak to you soon. All right, bye.
Okay. Cheers, mate. Bye.